The memorial gathering had been going for 2 hours when Auntie Abina said it. She said it the way that well-meaning people say things that detonate with warmth, with sincerity, with the complete confidence of someone repeating a story they have heard so many times they believe they were there when it happened. "Kweku," she said, raising her glass, "what you did for Mama Efua 2 years, every bill, never complaining this family will not forget. You are a true son." The room murmured its agreement. Heads nodded. Someone said amen. Kweku received it with the modest grace of a man who had heard this before and had learned exactly how to receive it. The slight downward look, the small shake of the head, the "it was nothing, she was family." Adwoa was sitting 3 chairs away. She had heard this story, the story of Kweku's sacrifice, Kweku's generosity, Kweku's 2 years of hospital bills at the funeral, at the 40 days, and now here, at the first anniversary of her mother's passing. She had heard it each time without saying anything. She had filed it. She had waited. She reached into her bag. She took out her wallet. From the wallet, she removed a folded envelope. From the envelope, she removed 24 receipts, each one a hospital payment, each one dated across 2 years, each one bearing the name of the person who had actually paid. She placed them on the table in front of her. She did not stand up. She did not raise her voice. "Auntie Abina," she said, "I have something to show you. Let me tell you about the 2 years. Mama Efua was diagnosed in March of the year before she died. The diagnosis was the kind that arrives with a specific weight, not immediately terminal, but serious enough that the word serious stopped feeling like a word and started feeling like a room you were now living in. She had been living in Kumasi. Adwoa was in Accra. The geography of care, who drove, who accompanied, who managed the appointments, who spoke to the doctors and translated what the doctors said into what a mother could hear and hold fell, as it tends to fall, to the child who was closest. Adwoa was closest. Adwoa had always been closest, not because she had stayed in the same city, but because she was the kind of daughter who, when something happened to her mother, became the infrastructure through which the response was organized. She had been this since she was a teenager, the one who handled the logistics, who made the calls, who kept the records. She kept records now. Every hospital visit was recorded in a notebook she carried in her bag date. Hospital, doctor seen, medication prescribed, amount paid, receipt collected. The receipts she kept in an envelope. The envelope lived in her wallet, then in a drawer at home, then back in her wallet when the visits became more frequent and she understood that the envelope was going to need to be accessible. Kweku had come to some of the visits. Not all he worked. He had responsibilities. He could not always leave Accra on a Tuesday when the appointment was scheduled. He had come when he could. He had paid for one visit a specific Tuesday in October in the first year, when Adwoa had been unwell herself and had asked him to take Mama Efua to the specialist. He had paid for that visit. She had paid for the other 23. The financial architecture of the 2 years was simple. Adwoa earned a salary that was adequate for her life in Accra. She had savings she had built over 10 years of working. She redirected a significant portion of both, for 2 years, into the care of her mother. This was not a conversation she had with Kweku. Not because she was keeping it secret, but because it had not seemed to require a conversation. The bills came, she paid them, she filed the receipts, she continued. She had not expected the narrative to be rewritten. And I want to stay with the 2 years for a moment before we get to the memorial, because the 2 years are the story, not the receipts. The receipts are just the evidence. The story is what the 2 years actually looked like, and what it cost, and what it produced in Adwoa when she saw the cost being attributed to someone else. What it looked like: a car on the Accra-Kumasi road on Saturday mornings, sometimes in traffic that added 2 hours to a journey that was already 3, driven by a woman who had worked a full week and would drive back on Sunday and work again on Monday. It looked like a phone call every evening, not a quick "how are you," but a real call, the kind where you actually listen to how someone is and what they need and what they are afraid of. It looked like the specific knowledge of a sick person that you only acquire by being present, which medication made the nausea worse, which time of day the pain was lowest, Which doctor was the one who actually explained things rather than speaking in the direction of the chart? It looked like money. Consistent, significant, redirected the savings account that had been building toward something else, now building toward her mother's health. She had not resented this. She had been clear-eyed about it. Her mother needed care, and Edouard had the means to provide it, and she provided it. This was not complicated. What became complicated was the watching, afterward, as the account of what had been provided was assembled around someone who had provided very little of it. She had kept the receipts not as ammunition. She had kept them because she was someone who kept receipts, because accuracy was how she organized her relationship with the world. Because the notebook and the envelope and the filing system was simply what her mind produced when it was managing something important. She had not decided, when she started keeping them, that she would one day spread them on a table at a memorial gathering. She had simply kept them because they were true. In the days after the funeral, Kweku had spoken to his family about the 2 years. He had not lied explicitly. He had used the language of we and the family and what we did for Mama in ways that were technically inclusive, but that produced, in the people who heard them, the specific impression that he had been the financial engine of the care. His aunt had asked him directly at the 40 days, "Did you pay all those bills?" And he had said, with the modest deflection of someone who had been practicing it, "Someone had to." Someone had. It had been Adwoa. She had 24 receipts that said so. And she had also been the person who managed the doctors learning each specialist's name, understanding what questions would get useful answers rather than careful deflections. The hospital had her number as primary contact. She researched treatment alternatives when the first approach produced insufficient results. She spent 2 hours on the phone with the insurance company in month 16 until the claim processed correctly. The receipts captured one dimension of the 2 years. The other dimensions lived in her notebook and her memory, and the knowledge you only acquire by being the one who is there. Here is the story Kweku told. Not in one speech, not with explicit claims, but in the accumulated weight of what he said and what he allowed to be believed. He had been present. He had been supportive. He had driven his mother-in-law to appointments when he could. He had been, by the standard of most sons-in-law in most families, genuinely present and genuinely caring. None of this was false. He had done these things. What he had also done was accept the credit for the financial sacrifice without correcting the assumption. When his mother said, "You have given so much," he had said, "Of course, she is family." When his colleague said, "I heard you covered all the hospital costs for 2 years. That is remarkable," he had said, "What else could I do?" When Auntie Abena had begun to construct, at the 40 days, the story that would crystallize into the toast at the memorial Kweku, "True son, 2 years," every bill he had let it crystallize. He had built nothing. He had simply failed to demolish something that was being built around him. The distinction, he had told himself in his more self-aware moments, was meaningful. He had not fabricated. He had allowed. Adwoa had understood this distinction and had decided, in the specific way she decided things quietly, after complete analysis, that the distinction did not hold. You are responsible for what you allow to be believed about you. The silence that permits a false story to calcify is not neutrality, it is participation. She had said nothing at the funeral because her mother had just died, and she was not going to make the funeral about money. She had said nothing at the 40 days because the grief was still fresh, and she was not going to make the 40 days about money. At the first anniversary memorial, her mother had been gone for a year. The grief was not gone. Grief of this kind does not go. It changes shape and becomes something you carry differently rather than something you set down. But the year had done its work on other things. On the clarity of what had happened and what had been allowed to happen, on the specific resentment that comes from watching someone accept credit for a sacrifice you made in private over 2 years while your mother was dying. She had decided, sometime in the week before the memorial, that she was going to bring the envelope, not to explode anything, not to humiliate anyone, simply to be accurate at a gathering in her mother's memory about what her mother's care had actually looked like and who had actually provided it. She put the envelope in her wallet on the morning of the memorial. She drove to the gathering. She greeted everyone. She accepted the food. She sat in her chair. She waited. And I want to describe the 2 hours before Auntie Abena's toast, because they were not nothing. They were the specific experience of being at a gathering in your mother's memory while carrying something that you know is going to need to be said. She had been present in the grief. That is the first thing to understand. She was not sitting in the room managing a strategy, counting the minutes until she could produce the envelope. She was at her mother's memorial, in her mother's house, surrounded by the people who had loved her mother. And the grief was real, and it was present, and it was doing what grief does in those rooms, which is to fill the spaces between the talking and the eating and the remembering. She had heard the stories about her mother, that the relatives told the ones that were funny, the ones that were sharp, the ones that revealed things about Mama Efua that Adwa had not known. She had cried once, briefly, when her cousin Akua had told a story about a time when Mama Efua had done something characteristically generous and characteristically embarrassing at the same time, the specific story of someone who had lived fully and without excessive caution. She had eaten, she had spoken, she had been, as she was always at family gatherings, the person who noticed when someone's glass was empty and filled it, who made sure the food was being replenished, who checked on the older relatives to make sure they were comfortable. And underneath all of this, in the pocket of the bag at her feet, the wallet with the envelope, she had not decided, that morning, that she was going to use it at the toast. She had brought it because she had been carrying it for a year, and she had understood, when she drove to Kumasi for the memorial, that the carrying had an endpoint, that the right moment would come, that when it came, she would know. Auntie Abena raised her glass. Adwoa knew. She reached into her bag and took out her wallet, and took the envelope from the wallet, and waited for Auntie Abena to finish. She waited through 2 years, every bill, never complaining. She waited through True Son. She waited through the room's agreement and the amens and Kweku's modest deflection. Then she said, "Auntie Abena, I have something to show you." She did not rush it. She was not shaking. She was the same person she had been 2 hours before, the person who had filled the glasses and replenished the food and been present in the grief, now doing the thing that had been waiting 2 years to be done. Not with fanfare. Not with a prepared speech, with an envelope from a wallet, spread on a table, in the quiet that followed a toast. The most accurate correction she could make, in the most appropriate room, at the most appropriate time. Her mother had asked for accuracy. She was providing it. Let me tell you what was in the envelope. 24 receipts. Each one from a hospital or pharmacy or specialist clinic in Kumasi or Accra, each one dated across the 26 months of Mama Efua's illness. Each one bearing, in the payee field or the payment name field or the handwritten notation of the cashier who processed it, the name Adwo A. Mensah. The first receipt was from March, the initial diagnosis appointment, the specialist consultation that confirmed what the GP had suspected. Adwoa had driven to Kumasi on a Thursday, had sat with her mother through the consultation, had paid the specialist fee at the window and received the receipt and put it in the envelope she had bought at the stationery shop on the way out. The fifth receipt was from a pharmacy in Accra, the medication that needed to be sourced from the capital because it was not available in Kumasi, that Adwoa ordered and paid for and drove to Kumasi on a Saturday to deliver. The 10th was from the hospital ward admission in month 8, when Mama Efua's condition had deteriorated enough to require a week of inpatient care. The 15th was from the specialist review in month 14, the one that had produced the news that the treatment was working but would need to continue for longer than originally estimated. The 23rd receipt was Kweku's the Tuesday in October, when he had taken Mama Efua to the specialist and paid the consultation fee. It was in the envelope because Adwoa kept all the receipts, including the ones she had not paid, because she was someone who kept complete records. The 24th receipt was from the hospital on the Tuesday of the final week. Adwoa had been there. Kweku had not been able to come. The receipt was for a procedure that had not, in the end, changed the outcome. It was the last bill she had paid for her mother's care, 5 days before her mother died. 24 receipts, one of them Kweku's, 23 of them hers. She had not organized them in preparation for this day. They were simply organized because she was someone who organized things. They were dated and in order and complete, the way her records always were, because the habit of accuracy was not something she turned on and off depending on whether she was planning to use the records for something. She had not been planning to use the records for something. She had kept them because keeping them was correct. And she had also, in those 2 years, been the person who managed the relationship with the doctors, who learned each specialist's name and how they preferred to be addressed, and what questions would get useful answers rather than careful deflections. She was the person the hospital called when there was news, because she was the number in the records as the primary contact. She was the person who researched the treatment options when the first approach was not producing the results they had hoped for. She was the person who stayed on the phone with the insurance company for 2 hours in month 16 until the claim was processed correctly. She was using them now because the moment had come when accuracy was required. She had also been the person who managed the relationship with the doctors, who learned each specialist's name, what questions would get useful answers. She was the number in the hospital records as primary contact. She was the one who researched treatment options when the first approach was not producing results. She was the one who stayed on the phone with the insurance company for 2 hours in month 16 until the claim was processed correctly. The care was not only financial, the care was total. The receipts captured one dimension of it. The other dimensions lived only in her memory and her notebook and the specific knowledge of what a 2-year illness looks like from inside the person who is managing it. And let me tell you something about the 24th receipt, the last one in the envelope, from the final week, because it is different from the others in a way that matters. The other 23 are medical payments, specialist consultations, medication purchases, hospital admissions, pharmacy runs. They are the administrative record of what keeping someone alive costs. They are accurate and they are significant, and they tell the story of 2 years in the language of receipts, which is to say, they tell it in the language that cannot be argued with. The 24th receipt is from the hospital on the Tuesday of the last week. It is a payment for a procedure that Adwoa had driven to Kumasi to authorize and pay for, alone, because Kweku had a meeting that could not be moved. It is, on its face, identical to the other receipts. Amount, date, hospital name, Adwo Mensah in the payee field. But it is the receipt from 5 days before her mother died. From the day Adwoa sat in a hospital corridor by herself and understood, from what the doctor had said, that the procedure had not done what they had hoped it would do. From the day she had held her mother's hand and not cried because her mother was still awake and she did not want her mother to see her cry. From the day she had driven back to Accra in the dark, alone, and had not called anyone because there was no one to call who would have understood what she was driving away from. She had put that receipt in the envelope with the others. She had not separated it or marked it. It was simply the 24th receipt, in order, in the envelope, along with the 23 that had come before it. But she knew which one it was. She always knew which one it was. And when she spread the receipts on the table at the memorial, and the last one in the stack was the one from the final Tuesday, she had touched it for a moment before setting it down, not dramatically, not in a way anyone would have noticed. Just a moment of contact between her hand and the piece of paper that had been in the corridor with her on the day the corridor had been the worst place to be alone. Her mother had been cared for. The record said so. 24 times, in the precise language of payment confirmations, the records said so. And the records would continue to say so, not just in the envelope in Adwoa's wallet, but now in the memory of everyone who had been in that room at the memorial. The correction had been made. The accurate version was now the one that the family carried. The photographs on the table, and the stories told about Mama Efua, and the understanding of who had been there, and what they had done, all of this was now accurate, in the way that things become accurate when someone who kept the receipts chooses the right moment to show them. She had kept the receipts. She had chosen the moment. The records said what was true. The gathering was in the family home in Kumasi, Mama Efua's house, the one she had lived in for 30 years, and that now, in the complex way of inheritance, was in the process of being understood as belonging to someone. The rooms smelled of food and candles, and the particular warmth of a large family occupying a small space. Photographs of Mama Efua were arranged on a table in the sitting room. Her at a wedding, at a graduation, at a church picnic, the specific archive of a life seen through the photographs, its people thought worth keeping. Adwoa had been the one to arrange the photographs. She had come a day early to help with the preparations. She had cooked with her sister Ama and her cousin Akua, and had arranged the chairs and received the early arrivals and been, as she always was at family events, the person who made things work without being the person anyone would necessarily notice was making them work. Kweku had arrived at the gathering itself, at the correct time, looking correct. The first 2 hours had been what such gatherings are, the sharing of memories, the food, the specific quality of laughter that surfaces in grief after enough time has passed that laughter is available again. Adwoa's sister Ama had spoken about their mother. An uncle had spoken about their mother. A former colleague of Mama Efua's had spoken about their mother. Each time, Adwoa had listened with the expression of someone who is fully present in the grief, and also, somewhere beneath the grief, aware of the envelope in her wallet. Auntie Abena had begun her toast in the way that Auntie Abena began things, with warmth, with the authority of someone who has been in this family for 40 years and has earned the right to speak about it. She had praised the gathering, she had praised the food, she had praised the family's resilience, and then she had turned to Kweku with a specific beam of someone who has been waiting to say the best thing and said, "What you did for Mama Efua 2 years, every bill, never complaining, this family will not forget. You are a true son." Kweku had done the modest thing, the room had done the agreeing thing, and Adwoa had reached into her bag. And I want to describe the 2 hours before Auntie Abena's toast, because they were not nothing. They were the specific experience of being at a gathering in your mother's memory while carrying something you know is going to need to be said. She had been present in the grief, not sitting in the room managing a strategy or counting minutes. She was at her mother's memorial, in her mother's house, surrounded by people who had loved her mother, and the grief was real and present, and filling the spaces between the talking and the eating and the remembering. She had heard the stories about Mama Efua, the funny ones, the sharp ones. She had cried once, briefly, when her cousin Akua told a story that was characteristically generous and characteristically embarrassing at the same time. She had eaten, she had spoken, she had been, as she always was at family gatherings, the person who noticed when someone's glass was empty and filled it, who checked on the older relatives, who made sure the food was replenished, and underneath all of this, in the bag at her feet, the wallet with the envelope. She had not decided that morning to use it during the toast. She had brought it because she had been carrying it for a year and had understood, driving to Kumasi for the memorial, that the carrying had an end point, that the right moment would come, that when it came she would know. Auntie Abena raised her glass. Adwoa knew. She reached into her bag and took out her wallet and removed the envelope and waited for Auntie Abena to finish. She waited through 2 years, every bill, never complaining. She waited through True Son. She waited through the room's agreement and the amens and Kweku's modest deflection. Then she said, "Auntie Abena, I have something to show you." She did not rush it. She was not shaking. She was the same person she had been 2 hours before, the one who had filled the glasses and been present in the grief, now doing the thing that had been waiting 2 years to be done. Not for drama, for accuracy, for her mother, who had asked for the true story. The gathering went quiet when she said, "Auntie Abena, I have something to show you." Not the silence of a disruption, the silence of a room that has just understood that something is about to be said that needed to be said. Kweku, at the other end of the room, became very still. She took the envelope from her wallet. She opened it. She separated the receipts into 2 piles, one on the left, 23 on the right. She did not rush. She let the arrangement be the first statement. "This one," she said, holding up the single receipt, "is Kweku's. October, year 1. He took Mama to the specialist and paid. I want to say that." She set it down. She held up the 23, spread them so the names were visible, Adwo Mensah, repeated across 2 years of her mother's care. "These are mine." The room read them, the name Adwoa Mensah appearing on the top receipt, then the next, then the next. Auntie Abena picked one up and held it. She read the amount. She read the date. She read the name carefully. She set it down with the careful motion of someone who has just understood something significant and is making sure they have understood it correctly before they respond to it. She placed the receipts on the table in front of her, 24 of them, stacked in order. She did not stand. She did not raise her voice. She said, "Auntie Abena, I have something to show you," in the same tone she might use to show someone a photograph that was relevant to a conversation they were having. The tone of someone making a factual contribution to an ongoing discussion. Auntie Abena looked at her. The room looked at her. Kweku looked at her. She separated the receipts into 2 piles. She held up the smaller pile, one receipt. "This one," she said, "is Kweku's. October, year 1. He took Mama to the specialist that Tuesday and paid for the consultation. I want to say that." She set it down. She held up the larger pile, 23 receipts. "These are mine," she said. "Every other payment, for 2 years. My name is on each one." She set them down on the table. She spread them slightly so the dates and the names were visible to anyone who wanted to look. "I am not saying this to take anything away from Kweku," she said. "He was there when he could be. He drove Mama to appointments. He visited. He cared in the ways that he cared." A pause. "But the bills were mine. I want Mama Efua's memory to be accurate. She deserves that." The room was very quiet. Auntie Abena was looking at the receipts. She was reading the name on the top one, Adwo Mensah, and the date and the amount and the hospital name. She was a woman who had lived 62 years and who had been in enough family situations to understand, when she saw what she was seeing, exactly what she was seeing. "Adwoa," she said. Not a question, simply her name, said with the weight of someone who has just understood something. Kweku had not spoken. He was looking at the table. The specific quality of his silence was the silence of someone who had known, in some part of themselves, that the envelope existed, had known, because he had seen Adwo with receipts, had seen the envelope in her wallet, had understood what it contained, and had not made the calculations correctly about what that meant for how long the story could stand. Mr. Kofi Asare, the family elder in the deep brown cloth, leaned forward and looked at the receipts from his chair. He said nothing, but he picked up the top receipt and read it carefully, the way an elder reads something when he is performing the act of witnessing. Sister Ama, 3 chairs away, had not moved. She had known about the envelope. She had known about the receipts. She had said, when Adwa told her she was bringing them, "Good." Just that one word, with the specific weight of someone whose grief had been compounded by watching her sister's contribution go unnamed for a year. "And I want to stay in that room after Adwoa spoke." The room after those words was a specific kind of room, the kind that exists only when a truth has been said that cannot now be unsaid. Mr. Kofi Asare was still holding the receipt he had picked up. He was looking at it with the attention of an elder who understands that what he is witnessing is an act of historical accuracy. He set it back on the table carefully, with the care of someone returning something to its correct position. Auntie Abena had put her glass down. She was looking at Adwo with an expression moving through embarrassment at having praised someone incorrectly, discomfort at having been allowed to praise someone incorrectly, and something underneath both that was not quite admiration, but was related to it. She was looking at a woman who had carried this for a year and had chosen her moment and used it not to wound but to correct. The cousins were quiet. The elders were quiet. Mama Efua's former colleague was quiet. The room had the texture of a space where something important has just been done correctly, the specific stillness that follows when someone tells the truth at the right moment in the right way. Kweku had still not spoken. He was looking at the table. In that silence, in that specific quality of looking at the table, the room had understood everything it needed to understand about the gap between what had been said and what had been true. The 23 receipts and the one receipt were sitting in two piles in front of him, and they had said it more precisely than any confession could have. Adwoa was not watching him. She had done what she came to do. She was looking at the photographs of her mother on the table in the sitting room, the one at the wedding, the one at the graduation, the one at the church picnic, and she was thinking about her mother, which was what she had come here to do. "I am not saying this to take anything away from Kweku," she said into the quiet. "He was there when he could be. He cared, in the ways he cared. But the bills were mine. My mother deserves to have her memory accurate. That's all." She put the receipts back in the envelope back in the wallet back in the bag. The room stayed quiet for a moment after she finished. Then Auntie Efua, who had started the toast, who had said true son in the specific warmth of someone who believed it completely, said quietly to no one in particular, "I didn't know." "I know," Adwoa said. "That's why I'm saying it now, because she deserves the true account, because this is her memory and it should be correct." Kweku spoke eventually. He said, "I never said I paid everything." This was technically true. He had not said those words in that sequence. He had used the language of we and the family, and someone had to. He had not fabricated. He had allowed. Adwoa looked at him. She said, "No, you didn't say it. You let it be said." The room absorbed this. Auntie Abena set down her glass. She looked at Kweku with the expression of a woman who has just understood that the story she has been telling for a year is not the story that happened. She was not angry. She did not have the information yet to be angry, because she had not known, because she had been told a version and had not had a reason to question it. What she had was the specific discomfort of someone who has publicly praised someone for something that turns out to have not been true. "I didn't know," she said, to the room, to Kweku, to Adwoa. "I didn't know it was you." "I know," Adwoa said. "That's why I'm saying it now, because she deserves the true account, because this is her memory and it should be correct." Kweku was quiet for a long time. He was looking at the 23 receipts on the table, the 23 hospital payments and pharmacy payments and specialist consultation fees that he had not paid and that bore his wife's name and that had been sitting in an envelope in her wallet for 2 years, while she said nothing about them at the funeral, nothing about them at the 40 days, nothing about them at any of the family gatherings where his name had been attached to her sacrifice. He said, "Why didn't you say something before?" "Mama had just died," she said, "and then she had still just died, and then it was a year." She gathered the receipts. She put them back in the envelope. She put the envelope back in her wallet. She put her wallet back in her bag. "I said it now," she said, "because my mother deserves to have her memory be accurate. The people who were there for her should be named correctly. That's all." She was not crying. She was not angry. She was, and this was perhaps the most significant thing about the moment, simply precise. She had been the person who paid the bills. She had the receipts. She had waited for the right time. The right time had come, in the form of a toast at a memorial gathering, and she had used it. What happened after that, in the Mensa household, in the marriage, in the family relationships, in the long accounting of what 2 years of unacknowledged sacrifice means for a partnership, was not the subject of this story. Those were conversations that would happen privately, in the months that followed, without an audience. What the receipts had done was make it impossible for those conversations not to happen. And this, I think, is the thing about the receipts that matters most, not what they said about Kweku, but what they made possible for Adwoa. Not the correction of the record at the memorial, though the correction of the record mattered, but the conversations that had been impossible for 2 years and were now, in the days after the memorial, available. They had not spoken about it directly in the 2 years of her mother's illness. Adwoa had not said, "I am the one who is driving to Kumasi on Saturdays and paying the bills and sitting in the corridors." She had not said, "Where are you?" She had not said, "I need you to understand what this is costing." She had done the work and carried the cost and kept the receipts and said nothing. And the silence had been its own kind of load, not as heavy as grief, but present alongside it, the specific weight of doing something significant alone. Now the receipts were on the table, now Kweku's family had seen them, now Auntie Abena knew, and the conversations that had been impossible while the false story was intact were now necessary because the false story had been corrected. She had not done it to force those conversations. She had done it for her mother's memory. But she had understood, when she put the envelope in her wallet on the morning of the memorial, that what the receipts were going to do if she used them was more than correct the record. They were going to open something that needed to be open. Kweku called her the following week. The call was not easy. It was not the kind of call where everything is resolved in 40 minutes and people say they understand and mean it completely. It was the beginning of a longer conversation about the 2 years, about the silence, about what it had meant that she had been carrying this alone, and what it meant that he had let the story go the way it went. He did not say, "I didn't say I paid everything." He had already said that at the memorial, and it had landed the way it deserved to land. What he said on the phone was closer to, "I knew you were the one. I let them think otherwise. I don't have a good reason for that." She received it. She did not tell him it was fine. She told him it was the beginning of a conversation that was going to take more than one call. He said he understood. She said, "Good, because she was my mother, and she deserved better than a story about her care that wasn't true." The envelope had done its work, as envelopes, when they contain the truth, always do. And I want to be precise about what Kweku did and did not do, because this story is not about a villain in the straightforward sense. It is about something more specific and, perhaps, more common, the specific act of allowing a flattering story about yourself to calcify without correcting it. Kweku had not said, "I paid all the hospital bills." He had not stood up at the funeral and made a speech about his sacrifice. He had not gone to each family member individually and constructed the false account. What he had done was receive the credit when it was offered and decline to redirect it. When Auntie Abena said, "You are a true son," he had said she was family. When his colleague said, "I heard you covered all the costs," he had said, "What else could I do?" These are not confessions. They are not corrections either. They are the specific language of someone who is comfortable being believed about something that is not quite true, the passive receipt of credit that does not belong to you, made possible by the absence of the person who could correct it. Adwoa had been absent from those conversations. Not because she was hiding, she simply had not been there when Kweku's family and colleagues and friends had assembled the story. She had been in Kumasi, or at her desk in Accra, or on the phone with her mother, or sitting in a hospital corridor with a receipt in her bag. She had been doing the thing. He had been receiving the credit for the thing. And in the specific way of certain marriages and certain families, the distance between the doing and the crediting had widened over the months until they were describing 2 completely different stories of the same 2 years. She had understood this. She had let it accumulate. She had waited for the moment when the most important audience, her mother's family, the people who had loved Mama Efua and deserved to know the accurate account of who had cared for her, would be in the same room at the same time. That moment had arrived in the form of Auntie Abena's toast. Not chosen, not arranged, not engineered, simply arrived, the way moments arrive when you have been carrying something long enough and the right container finally presents itself. Not chosen, not arranged, not engineered, simply arrived, the way moments arrive when you have been carrying something long enough for the right container to present itself. And Adwoa had been ready. Not because she had planned for this exact moment she had brought the envelope without knowing precisely when she would use it, but because she had been carrying it for a year, and the carrying had taught her something, that the receipts would know when they were needed, that the truth, when it is organized and accurate and patient, will find its moment. Mama Efua had known. This is what Adwoa thought about in the weeks after the memorial, not about Kweku, not about Auntie Abena, not about the room, or the receipts, or the silence that had followed. She thought about her mother. She thought about the Tuesday afternoons in the hospital waiting room, when Mama Efua would sometimes reach over and take her hand without saying anything. She thought about the morning in month 15, when her mother had looked at her during a medication discussion and had said out of nowhere, without context, as though she had been thinking about it for a while, "Adwoa, you don't have to do all of this." And Adwoa had said, "I know, Mama, but I want to." And her mother had looked at her with the expression of a woman who knew the difference between want and obligation, and who had long since given up arguing with her eldest daughter about it. She thought about the last week, the last Tuesday, the procedure that had not changed the outcome. She had been there alone. Kweku had not been able to come. He had a meeting that could not move. She had understood. She had gone alone. She had sat in the corridor after the procedure, with the receipt in her bag and her mother sleeping in the room, and she had felt not bitterness, not resentment, just the specific weight of being the person who was there, which was different from the weight of anything else. Mama Efua had known, not the specific numbers, not the receipts, not the envelope, but the broader truth that her eldest daughter was carrying something large and carrying it without being asked to put it down. She had said, in month 18, "When I am gone, don't let anyone tell a story about me that isn't true." She had not said what story. She had not specified. But she had looked at Adwoa when she said it, with the specific directness of a mother who is speaking to the one child who will understand what she means without being told. Adwoa had understood. She had brought the envelope to the memorial, not for Kweku and not for herself, not primarily, but for the accurate account of what her mother's final 2 years had looked like, who had been there, who had paid, who had driven to Kumasi on Saturdays with medication and driven back on Sundays, who had sat in corridors, who had held the hand, who had kept the receipts. Her mother had asked for the true story. The true story was in the 24 receipts and the 23 names and the 2 years that would now, having been named correctly, belong permanently to the accurate record of what Mama Efua's final chapter had looked like. Like the Sankofa bird, Adwoa had looked back at the 2 years, at the 24 receipts, at the Tuesday afternoons and the Saturday drives, and the hand held in a waiting room, and she had collected what was true, not to wound anyone. To honour the woman who had said, "When I am gone, don't let anyone tell a story about me that isn't true." She had not let them. The receipts were in the envelope was in her wallet, the wallet was in her bag, and her mother's memory was accurate. This is what she thought about in the weeks and months after the memorial, when the conversations with Kweku were happening and the family relationships were adjusting and the year was becoming something different from what it had been. She thought about accuracy, about what it means for a memory to be accurate, about the specific disservice done to someone's life when the story of their final years is told incorrectly. Mama Efua had spent 2 years being cared for. The care had been provided by her eldest daughter, the drives, the payments, the calls, the presents, the hand held in a hospital corridor on the worst Tuesday. That was the accurate story. That was what had happened. And the accurate story now existed in the room at the memorial, in the receipts on the table, in the knowledge of the family who had been there to witness the correction. This mattered to Adwoa in a way that was separate from anything to do with Kweku. It mattered because her mother had asked for it. "When I am gone, don't let anyone tell a story about me that isn't true." She had not let them. She had brought the envelope and she had used it, and she had told the true story in the room where her mother's memory lived. She went back to Kumasi the week after the memorial. She had some of her mother's things to sort through the specific task of going through a person's belongings that requires you to be in the place where they lived, and to hold the objects they touched, and to decide what to keep and what to let go of. She sat at her mother's kitchen table, the table where Mama Efua had drunk her morning tea for 30 years, and she went through the receipts one more time. Not to organise them, not to use them for anything, simply to have them in her hands in the place where her mother had lived. She looked at each one, the dates, the amounts, the hospital names, the name Adwoa Mensah, repeated 23 times across 2 years. She thought about each visit. It represented the specific memory associated with each piece of paper, the context that the receipt could not contain but that she carried. Then she put them back in the envelope. She put the envelope in her wallet. She put her wallet in her bag. She made herself a cup of tea at her mother's table. She sat with it for a while. Her mother's memory was accurate. The record was correct. The story had been told truly in the right room at the right time. She drank the tea. She went back to work. That was enough.